Chapter 1: The Rupture. The gentle hum of the Odyssey's experimental dimensional drive was a baseline thrum against the silence of translunar space. Captain Eva Coral monitored the chronometer, her gaze steady. Beside her, Dr. Jian Li, a man whose brilliance was matched only by the intensity in his dark eyes, made minute adjustments to a holographic interface displaying swirling nebulae of impossible equations. Final pre-sequence checks complete, Captain. Drive core is stable. Energy matrix nominal. Eva nodded, her voice calm, broadcasting through the ship's internal comms. Bridge to engineering. Mac, status on the containment field regulators. Marcus O'Connell's voice, slightly distorted by static but reassuringly gruff, came back. Regulators green across the board, Captain. She's purring like a kitten. A very large, very dangerous kitten. Eva allowed herself a ghost of a smile. Mac's humor, dry as Martian dust, was a welcome constant. Understood, Mac. Stand by for sequence initiation. She turned to Lee. Doctor, the honor is yours. Lee's fingers danced across the console. Initiating dimensional fold sequence. T-minus 30 seconds. The hum deepened, a vibration that resonated in their bones. Lights on the bridge dimmed slightly as power diverted to the massive drive core situated deep within the Odyssey's structure. The ship was a marvel, humanity's boldest step, designed not to cross space, but the very fabric between realities. This was Test Flight 3, a short hop, a mere peek behind the curtain of their own universe. 20 seconds, Lee announced, his voice tight with anticipation. Eva gripped her command chair's armrests. Every test flight carried immense risk. They were charting waters no human had ever seen, where the maps were purely theoretical. 10, 9, 8. A sudden, violent shudder ripped through the Odyssey. Alarms blared, red lights strobed across the bridge, painting faces in harsh, panicked flashes. What was that? Eva snapped, her calm instantly replaced by razor-sharp focus. Lee frantically swiped at his console. Unscheduled energy spike, drive core is. It's fluctuating wildly. His voice cracked. Containment field is destabilizing. Mac, Eva yelled into the comm. Report. We've got breaches in the primary conduits, Captain. Trying to reroute, but the cascade. It's too fast. Mac's voice was strained, punctuated by the scream of tortured metal. The Odyssey screamed with him. The ship bucked like a wild animal, throwing unsecured items across the bridge. Eva fought to stay in her seat. Outside the main viewport, the familiar starscape twisted, smeared, then dissolved into a chaotic maelstrom of colors that had no names, geometries that defied Euclidean understanding. Lee shut it down. Eva ordered, her voice strained against the G-forces. I can't, the sequence is locked. We're going through. A blinding, silent explosion of white light consumed everything. For an immeasurable moment there was nothing but that annihilating brilliance. Then darkness, punctuated by the violent, percussive impacts of a catastrophic crash. Metal shrieked, groaned, tore. Eva was thrown forward, her restraint harness digging cruelly into her shoulders. Her head struck something hard. Silence. A profound, ringing silence that was almost as terrifying as the preceding chaos. Eva groaned, her vision swimming. The reek of burnt electronics and ozone filled her nostrils. Emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting long, dancing shadows. The bridge was a ruin. Consoles were shattered, wires hung like dead vines. Lee, her voice was a croak. Mac. A weak cough came from near the science station. Here, Captain. Lee's voice was thin. Status unknown. Eva unbuckled herself, her muscles protesting. She stumbled towards Lee, who was slumped over his ruined console, a trickle of blood matting his dark hair. Are you injured? My head. I think I'm okay, the ship. Let's worry about us first. Eva helped him sit upright. He seemed dazed but coherent. Comms are dead. Life support. She fumbled for a manual override panel that was miraculously intact. Green lights flickered on. Atmosphere is holding for now. Internal temperature dropping. Mac's voice, weak and breathless, crackled over a damaged comm panel. Bridge, Mac here. Engineering is a mess. Multiple hull breaches port side, trying to seal what I can. Main power offline, battery only. Understood, Mac. Stay put if you're injured, we'll get to you. Eva took a deep breath, trying to push down the rising panic. She was the captain. She needed to project control, even if she felt none. She moved to the main viewport, which was surprisingly intact, though hazed with fine cracks. What lay outside was nothing she recognized. No stars, no planets, just a swirling, bruised purple sky that seemed to press down on them. The Odyssey lay canted at a grotesque angle, half buried in crystalline, rust-colored sand. Jagged rock formations, like broken teeth, jutted from the ground at impossible angles. The air, visible through a fist-sized puncture in a secondary viewport, shimmered with an oily iridescence. Where are we? Lee whispered, joining her at the viewport, his face pale. Eva shook her head. Not in Kansas, Doctor. She tapped a console that still showed a flicker of life. Ship's chronometer is scrambled. Inertial navigation system is fried. External sensors, nothing, just noise. She tried a basic environmental scan. The readouts were gibberish, fluctuating wildly. One moment it reported vacuum, the next a corrosive atmosphere, then nitrogen oxygen, then something entirely unidentifiable. The drive, Lee muttered, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. When it spiked, it must have thrown us completely off the projected coordinates. We could be anywhere, anyone, any what. Eva understood. The space between realities wasn't supposed to be a place. It was a transition, a non-space, to be stranded here. Mac's voice came again, stronger this time. Captain, I've got some of the internal sensors partially online, trying to get a fix on our orientation relative to, well, relative to whatever this place is. Good work, Mac, Eva said, clinging to the semblance of procedure. Report anything you find. A few minutes later, Mac's voice was strained. Captain, this is odd. I'm running a simple triangulation scan from 3 intact external sensors. Standard stuff, just trying to map the immediate wreckage and surrounding terrain to see how badly we're embedded. And, Eva prompted. And the readings don't make sense. Sensor Alpha says that rock formation is 20 meters to port. Sensor Bravo says it's 50 meters starboard and upside down. Sensor Charlie says it's inside the engine room. Eva frowned. Recalibrate, Mac. There must be interference. Already did twice. The data is consistent in its inconsistency. It's like the very act of trying to measure our position is making it unstable. Each scan gives a different layout. Nothing major, just shifting, as if the terrain is shy. Lee stared out the viewport, his expression unreadable. The geometry here, it's not stable, it's fluid. Eva felt a cold dread seep into her bones, colder than the failing life support. Not just lost. They were lost in a place where the rules didn't apply, where the simple act of looking, of trying to understand, could change what they saw. A broken compass in a sea of madness. The first true tremor of fear ran down her spine. It had nothing to do with the crash or the isolation. It was the dawning realization that their minds, their very ability to perceive and navigate reality, might be their most immediate enemy in this alien, unformed place. The silence from Mac's comm after his last report stretched, heavy and ominous. "Mac," Eva called, her voice sharper than intended. "Mac, report." A long pause, then his strained voice. "Sorry, Captain, just rechecking. The system tried to plot a route back to the airlock from my current position in engineering. It mapped a straight line." He paused again. "Then it redrew the line, looping it outside the hull and through a bulkhead that's definitely still solid." Eva closed her eyes for a moment. This was worse than she could have imagined. "Nobody tries to navigate anywhere," she said, her voice low and firm. "Not until we understand what's happening. Nobody moves without a tether and a spotter. Is that clear?" Lee nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the impossible landscape. Mac's acknowledgement was a faint, weary, "Understood, Captain." The strange, bruised sky outside seemed to pulse, a slow, malevolent heartbeat. Eva felt a profound sense of being watched, not by eyes, but by the place itself. Chapter 2: Unstable Ground. The hours that followed were a blur of damage assessment and grim discovery. The Odyssey was crippled. Its spine, the central access corridor, was twisted and buckled. Whole sections were open to the alien sky, their contents strewn across the rust-colored sand. Of the 15 souls aboard, they had confirmed 7 survivors so far, including themselves. The others. The search parties, moving with extreme caution and physical tethers, had found only silence and ruin in the wreckage of the crew quarters and the secondary lab. Eva coordinated from the relatively intact auxiliary bridge, a smaller command center buried deeper within the ship. Mac, his arm in a makeshift sling from a dislocated shoulder he'd popped back in himself, worked tirelessly with 2 other surviving engineers, Jax and Rila, to restore minimal power and secure the breached sections against whatever lay outside. The air, when it occasionally gusted through compromised seals, carried a faint, metallic tang and an unsettling coolness that had nothing to do with temperature. Dr. Jian Lee was a man possessed. He'd salvaged what he could of his sensor equipment, setting up a temporary lab in a corner of the auxiliary bridge. Screens flickered with chaotic data streams, graphs that jagged and spiked without discernible pattern. He muttered to himself, scribbling equations on any flat surface he could find. The dimensional manifold is shattered, he announced to Eva, not looking up from a particularly violent waveform display. But the core emitter, it still has residual charge. If I can recalibrate the sequencing protocols, bypass the damaged stabilizers. Bypass them to do what, Doctor? Eva asked, her voice carefully neutral. She was trying to maintain a semblance of order, of a chain of command, but Lee's intensity was unsettling. He seemed to view their predicament not as a survival situation, but as the universe's most complex and personal affront to his theories. To initiate a micro-jump, Lee said, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes burned with a fervent light. A controlled destabilization, enough to shift us hopefully to a more congruent reality, a stable one. From there, we can attempt to send a signal or even navigate. Mac, overhearing from where he was splicing power cables, grunted. A micro-jump with half the ship missing and containment fields shot to hell. Doctor, with all due respect, that sounds like a fancy way to atomize what's left of us. The alternative, Engineer O'Connell, Lee retorted, his tone sharp, is to remain in this spatial anomaly. A place where, as your own sensors indicated, the laws of physics are apparently suggestions, not laws. How long do you think we can survive here before this dimension simply unwrites us? Eva held up a hand. Enough. Lee, what are the risks of this micro-jump? Lee hesitated. The energy calculations are difficult. The baseline reality here is so unstable, it's like trying to plot a course in a hurricane while standing on a spinning plate. There's a significant chance it could make things worse, shift us to an even less hospitable pocket. Or, Mac added grimly, it could just scatter our atoms across a dozen different impossibilities. Eva looked at the faces of her surviving crew. Fear, exhaustion, and a desperate, flickering hope. They were trapped. Their ship was a broken shell. The environment outside was actively hostile to their understanding of reality. Lee's proposal was a gamble, a terrible one, but inaction felt like a slower, more certain death. "What do you need, Doctor?" Eva asked. Lee's expression tightened with grim satisfaction. "Access to the primary drive conduits. I need to manually reroute power from the auxiliary fusion cells. It will take a few hours to bypass the safety interlocks and reconfigure the emitter array." "You want to manually reroute power to that disaster waiting to happen," Mac protested, wiping grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Captain, this is insane." "Do you have a better idea, Mac?" Eva countered, her patience wearing thin. "Can you fix the FTL comms? Can you repair the structural damage well enough to withstand whatever this place throws at us next?" Mac's jaw clenched. He looked down at his hands, then back at Eva. "No, ma'am, but this feels like pointing a gun at our own heads and hoping it misfires in a helpful direction." "It's a chance," Lee insisted. "A small one perhaps, but it's more than we have now." Eva made her decision. "All right, Doctor, you have a green light. Mac, assist him. I want double checks on every connection, every bypass. Rela, Jax, continue securing the habitable sections and take inventory of remaining supplies. We're on emergency rations as of now." The next few hours were tense. Lee and Mac, An unlikely and often argumentative pair worked deep within the mangled engineering section. Eva monitored their progress from the auxiliary bridge, her stomach churning with every power fluctuation, every spark from their work. The very air in the ship seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unspoken dread. Finally, Lee's voice, triumphant, crackled over the comm. "Captain, the bypass is complete. Emitter array is charged. We are ready to initiate the micro-jump sequence on your command." Eva took a deep breath. All hands brace for dimensional shift. She gripped the arms of her chair. "Dr. Lee, initiate sequence." "Initiating now." There was no violent lurch this time. Instead, a profound, disorienting wrongness. It was as if the entire ship was being squeezed through an impossibly small aperture. A low, grinding hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound that resonated deep in Eva's sinuses, making her teeth ache. The lights flickered, died, then flared back with an unnatural, sickly green glow. The displays on the consoles dissolved into kaleidoscopic static. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sensation stopped. The green glow faded, replaced by the standard emergency lighting. The grinding hum ceased. "Status," Eva managed, her voice hoarse. Lee's voice was hesitant. "Sequence completed. We have shifted, but the environmental readings are peculiar." Mac's voice came next, shaky. "Captain, you need to see this. Outside." Eva made her way to the nearest viewport, her heart pounding. The rust-colored sand was gone. The bruised purple sky was replaced by something that looked like a twilight perpetually frozen on the edge of dawn, or perhaps dusk. The ground was a flat, featureless plain of what appeared to be polished obsidian, stretching to an unnervingly close horizon that seemed to curve upwards, as if they were at the bottom of a vast, shallow bowl. But it was the structures, if they could be called that made her breath catch. Rising from the obsidian plain were impossibly tall, impossibly thin spires. They weren't solid, but appeared as shimmering, multi-angled lines of distorted light, like heat haze given terrifying form. They shifted, their angles subtly changing, never resolving into a coherent shape. They looked less like objects and more like tears in the fabric of this new reality, glimpses of something terrible beyond. "What are those?" Rila whispered, her face pressed against another viewport. "I don't know," Lee said, his voice awed and horrified. "The energy signatures are. I've never seen anything like it. They seem to exist in multiple spatial dimensions simultaneously." As Eva watched, one of the distant spires seemed to lean, or perhaps her perception of it leaned. The ground beneath her feet felt stable, yet the spire appeared to tilt at an impossible angle without falling, its shimmering lines rearranging themselves. She felt a wave of nausea, a profound disorientation, as if her inner ear was being directly assaulted. "Captain," Mac said, his voice strained. He was staring fixedly at one of the nearer spires. Don't look at them for too long, it does something to your head." His face was pale, beaded with sweat. He swayed slightly. Eva forced her gaze away, blinking. The sense of vertigo lingered. "Report, Mac." "When I look at them, it's like up isn't up anymore. My sense of balance, of direction, it all goes sideways. Literally. I tried to take a step towards the console and nearly walked into the bulkhead to my left. Lee was rapidly typing at his salvaged terminal. His description is consistent with extreme perceptual distortion. These entities, these structures, they must be emitting some kind of field that directly interferes with the brain's spatial processing centers. Perspective skewers, Jax muttered, his eyes wide with fear. They're skewering our damn perspective. The name stuck. Eva looked back at the shimmering, unsettling forms. They were scattered across the plain, some distant, some unnervingly close. One, smaller than the others, seemed to be slowly, almost deliberately, drifting towards the Odyssey's wreckage. It wasn't moving in a conventional sense. Rather, its position relative to them was changing, its angles subtly reconfiguring. "So, Doctor," Eva said, her voice tight, "your micro-jump, did it improve our situation?" Lee didn't answer. He was staring at his screen, his face a mask of disbelief. The residual dimensional energies, they're higher here, significantly higher this place. It's even less stable than where we were. He looked up at Eva, his earlier confidence shattered. I made it worse. The compass. It's not just broken, Captain. It's actively leading us into the storm. The nearby perspective skewer twitched, its shimmering lines momentarily flaring with an intense, colorless light. A wave of spatial sickness washed over the auxiliary bridge. Eva grabbed onto a console for support as the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet, even though she knew, logically, it hadn't moved an inch. The fragile hope that had flickered among the survivors was extinguished, replaced by a chilling new reality. They weren't just lost, they were being herded. Chapter 3: Whispers of Unknowing. Days, or what they perceived as days in the perpetual twilight of the obsidian plain, bled into one another. The perspective skewers remained a constant, unnerving presence. The survivors learned to avert their gazes, to navigate the cramped confines of the Odyssey's wreckage by touch and memory as much as by sight, lest the shimmering entities induce bouts of crippling vertigo and spatial confusion. Movement outside the ship was strictly forbidden unless absolutely necessary, and even then, it was a terrifying ordeal of short, tethered excursions. The psychological toll was immense. Sleep offered little respite, often plagued by dreams of falling through infinitely shifting geometries. Conversations became clipped, strained. Every creak of the damaged hull, every flicker of the emergency lights, sent nerves jangling. Captain Coral fought to maintain morale, to keep her small band focused on survival tasks, rationing supplies, reinforcing breached sections, trying to cultivate the edible fungi they'd found in a miraculously intact hydroponics bay. But the oppressive atmosphere of the place, the constant, low-grade spatial distortion even away from the skewers, wore everyone down. Dr. Lee had retreated further into himself. He spent his waking hours hunched over his makeshift console, surrounded by scrawled notes and diagrams that grew increasingly abstract, almost frantic. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was often in disjointed phrases about n-dimensional topography and reality attrition. His attempts to understand their predicament, to find a pattern in the madness, seemed only to deepen his own descent. Mac, despite his earlier pessimism, threw himself into his work with a dogged determination. He cannibalized parts from non-essential systems, trying to bolster the ship's failing life support and fortify their fragile shelter. "If we can't get out," he'd grunted to Eva, "we at least need to make this coffin as livable as possible." But even his practical skills were hampered by the environment. Tools would feel subtly wrong in his grasp, measurements would shift, and straightforward repairs would inexplicably fail or produce bizarre side effects. It started subtly. Rila, one of the engineers, was trying to repair a faulty water recycler. She stared at a simple hydraulic coupling, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mac," she called out, her voice puzzled. This connector. I can't remember how it fastens, clockwise or the other way." Mac frowned. "It's a standard Bayless fitting, Rila, righty-tighty." Rila shook her head, a look of genuine confusion on her face. "Righty-tighty? I don't understand what that means." She looked at the tool in her hand, a simple spanner, as if it were an alien artifact. How do I use this?" Eva, who had overheard the exchange, felt a chill. Rila was a seasoned engineer. Forgetting something so basic was wrong. "Rila, are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, Captain," Rila insisted, though her eyes were clouded with a strange vacancy. "Just a bit tired, I suppose." She fumbled with the coupling, her movements suddenly clumsy, stripping the threads. Similar incidents began to occur with increasing frequency. Jacks, trying to log their dwindling ration supplies, would pause, pen hovering over his data pad, unable to recall the symbol for a common nutrient paste. Another survivor, a botanist named Kenji, momentarily forgot how to open a sealed specimen container. These weren't just slips of memory due to stress. It was as if specific, isolated pieces of knowledge were being cleanly excised from their minds. One evening, Eva found Max staring blankly at a schematic he'd been working on for hours. "Problem, Mac." He looked up, his eyes unfocused. "This symbol, Captain, the one for the primary power relay. I can't picture what the actual component looks like. I know I've replaced it a dozen times, but the image, it's gone." He rubbed his temples, a frustrated growl rumbling in his chest. "It's like there's a hole in my head where that information should be." Eva felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This was new. This wasn't the spatial distortion of the skewers. This was something else, something more insidious. It was an erosion of the mind itself. Dr. Lee, surprisingly, provided a terrifying hypothesis. He'd been monitoring subtle energy fluctuations, background radiation that was almost imperceptible beneath the chaotic noise of the dimension. "There's a field," he explained, his voice flat, almost detached during one of their grim rationed meals. "A coherent entropic field, highly localized. It doesn't affect matter directly. It seems to target information, specifically neural patterns, memories, concepts." "You mean something out there is eating our thoughts?" Jax asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lee shrugged, a jerky, unsettling motion. "A crude analogy, perhaps, more like unknowing. It selectively degrades complex neural structures associated with learned information. The more abstract the concept, the more vulnerable it seems to be." He tapped his own temple. "Our minds are pattern engines. This field, it introduces noise, randomness, until the pattern collapses." The conceptual thief, Eva murmured, remembering an old piece of speculative fiction. The name felt horribly apt. This dimension wasn't just trying to break their perception of space, it was trying to dismantle their very ability to think. The realization sent a fresh wave of despair through the survivors. They were already contending with a hostile environment, dwindling supplies, and the maddening presence of the prospective skewers. Now, they faced an enemy that attacked them from within, stealing their knowledge, their skills, their very identities, piece by piece. The attempts to navigate, to understand their location, had led them here. Jian Li's micro-jump, born of a desperate need to find a stable reality, had instead delivered them into a place that was actively unmaking their minds. The broken compass wasn't just a metaphor for their navigational woes. It was a descriptor for their fragmenting sanity. One particularly bad episode involved Mac. He was attempting to reroute power from a damaged section, a task he'd done countless times. Suddenly, he stopped, holding two wires, his expression utterly blank. "Captain," he said, his voice hollow, "these colors, red, blue, what do they signify? Which one is safe?" Eva had to physically pull him away from the live wires, her heart hammering. The knowledge of basic electrical safety, ingrained in him since his earliest training, had vanished in an instant. The incident terrified everyone. If Mac, their most skilled engineer, could lose such fundamental knowledge, what hope was there for any of them? Paranoia began to fester. Survivors eyed each other with suspicion. Was a colleague's forgetfulness a sign of the conceptual thief's influence, or something more deliberate? Simple tasks became fraught with anxiety. Was the person next to you still competent, still rational? Could you trust your own memory, your own skills? Captain Coral tried to implement countermeasures. They began working in pairs on all critical tasks, constantly cross-checking each other. They started writing down procedures, creating simplified diagrams, trying to anchor their knowledge in the physical world. But it was like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a thimble. The diagrams would become confusing. The written instructions would lose their meaning as the underlying concepts faded. One morning, Eva woke to find Dr. Lay staring at the main viewport, not at the skewers but at the obsidian plain. His face was serene, almost beatific. "Doctor," Eva said cautiously. Lee turned slowly. "Captain," he said, his voice soft, "I was just contemplating the beautiful simplicity before I was trying to impose order to find the equations that govern this place." He gestured vaguely. "But I see now. There are no equations, there is no order, only this." He smiled, a vacant, empty smile. "It's quite liberating once you stop trying to understand." Eva felt a profound chill. The conceptual thief hadn't just stolen Lee's scientific knowledge. It had stolen his drive, his intellect, his very essence, leaving behind a placid, incurious shell. The man who had been so desperate to navigate, to find a way out, now seemed content to drift in the abyss. The broken compass had led them here, and now it was breaking them. The nearest perspective skewer outside the viewport shimmered, its lines contracting into a tight, almost painful configuration, as if in response to the shift within the Odyssey's dying shell. The floor seemed to lurch, not with the familiar spatial sickness, but with something more final like the settling of a tomb. Chapter 4. Shifting Sands, Shifting Selves. The degradation accelerated. The conceptual thief, as they'd morbidly dubbed the unseen force, was relentless. Each survivor became a fading map of their former self. Conversations dwindled to essential, simple exchanges. The carefully constructed logbooks Eva had insisted upon became increasingly sparse, filled with shaky handwriting and incomplete sentences, the very language betraying the erosion of their minds. Mac O'Connell, once the bedrock of practical competence, now struggled with tasks that would have been second nature. He'd spend an hour trying to patch a leaking pipe, only to forget why he'd started or how the components were supposed to fit. His frustration was a palpable thing, a low growl of anger directed at his own failing mind. He'd sometimes slam a tool down, roaring inarticulately before sinking into a dejected silence. Eva watched him, her heart aching. His strength, his resilience, was being hollowed out from the inside. The prospective skewers outside remained their silent, warping jailers. One day, Jax, one of the younger engineers, was tasked with checking the external atmospheric seals on a section of the hull that was still relatively intact. He was tethered, with Rila monitoring him from the airlock. Eva watched on a grainy monitor. Jax moved slowly, cautiously, his gaze carefully averted from the shimmering spires. He reached the seal, ran a diagnostic tool over it. Then he stopped. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, towards the nearest skewer. Its shifting lines seemed to pulse to draw him in. "Jax, no," Rila screamed into the comm, her voice thin with panic. "Look away, Jax." On the monitor, Eva saw Jax take a hesitant step towards the entity. His tether line went taut. He tugged at it, a confused, almost childlike expression on his face. "It's calling," his voice crackled over the comm, distant and strange. "It wants to show me the true shape." "Pull him back, Rila. Now," Eva ordered, her voice like a whip crack. Rila, her face a mask of terror, strained at the winch. Jax fought against the pull, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. He reached out a hand towards the skewer, as if to touch its impossible geometry. The skewer nearest him flared, not with light but with a visible distortion, a ripple in the fabric of their reality that emanated outwards. The image on Eva's monitor twisted violently. The floor of the auxiliary bridge seemed to drop away, then slam back up, throwing Eva against her console. She heard screams from other parts of the ship. When her vision cleared, the monitor showing Jax was just static. "Rila, report." A choked sob came over the comm. "He's gone, Captain, the tether. It snapped, not broke, just. It's like it unwove, and Jax, he just folded into it, into the skewer." Eva stared at the static, her blood running cold. Folded. The word sent shivers down her spine. The prospective skewers weren't just messing with their perception. They were actively hostile, capable of absorbing them. And Jax, his mind perhaps already weakened by the conceptual thief, had walked right into its embrace. The loss of Jax and the horrifying manner of his death sent a fresh wave of terror through the remaining survivors. They were now down to 5. Eva, Mac, Lee, who was mostly a vacant shell, Rila and Kenji, the botanist, who had become increasingly withdrawn, spending his time tending to his small patch of fungi as if they were the only sane things left in this universe. The incident with Jax seemed to trigger something new in Dr. Lee. He emerged from his near-catatonic state, but not as his old self. His eyes, previously empty, now held a strange, unsettling focus. He began to talk again, but his words were no longer about science or escape. He spoke of aligning with the dominant waveform, of shedding the illusion of coherent self. "The skewers are not enemies," he announced one evening, his voice calm and devoid of emotion as he stared out at the shimmering entities. "They are conduits. They offer integration. True understanding comes not from resisting the patterns, but from becoming part of them." "Lee, that's madness," Eva said, trying to keep the alarm out of her voice. "Jax is dead because of those things." Lee tilted his head, a slow, bird-like movement. "Dead? No, Captain. He has merely reconfigured. He has achieved a higher state of spatial complexity." He smiled, that same vacant, beatific smile as before, but now with an edge of something knowing, something alien. "Soon we will all understand. The attempts to navigate, to maintain our outdated forms, they only prolong the dissonance." Eva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing heaters. The conceptual thief wasn't just erasing knowledge, it was preparing them, hollowing them out for some other, more terrible purpose. And Lee, in his broken state, was becoming its mouthpiece. Mac, overhearing Lee's pronouncements, let out a snarl. "You stay the hell away from me, Doctor, and from everyone else." He hefted a heavy wrench, his knuckles white. Despite his own degrading mind, a primal instinct for self-preservation still burned within him. The dynamic aboard the Odyssey shifted. Lee was no longer just a lost mind. He was a potential threat, a vector for the alien influence of this dimension. Eva ordered Rila and Kenji to avoid him, to report any strange behavior. She herself kept a wary eye on the physicist, who now spent most of his time near the viewports, whispering to the prospective skewers. Their already meager supplies dwindled further. The hydroponic fungi, their only renewable food source, began to wither, their growth stunted by the pervasive, hostile energies of the dimension. Kenji, the botanist, tended to them with a quiet despair, his own expertise slowly slipping away. He'd stare at a dying plant, unable to recall the specific nutrient deficiency causing its decline. One cycle, Rila reported that the primary water reclamation unit was failing. "The microfilters are clogged," she said, her voice dull with exhaustion and a growing apathy. I don't remember the override sequence to flush them. The manual. The words don't make sense anymore." Mac, who would have once been able to strip down and rebuild the unit blindfolded, just stared at it, his face a mask of frustration. "It's tubes. Water goes in. Clean water should come out." He picked up a tool, then put it down again, defeated. Eva knew that without water they wouldn't last long. Desperation clawed at her. They had to try something, anything. Her gaze fell upon the ruined dimensional drive controls on the main bridge, a place they'd largely avoided. Lee's disastrous micro-jump had made them terrified of it. But what other choice did they have? To stay here was to be unmade, mind and body. "Mac," she said, her voice firm, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "We're going to try and get the drive operational again." Mac looked at her, his eyes clouded with the fog of the conceptual thief, but a flicker of his old self sparked within them. "Captain, after what happened last time, and with our heads," he gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the full extent of their cognitive decline. "We don't have a choice," Eva said. "Lee said there was residual charge if we can just nudge ourselves anywhere but here." She knew it was a long shot, bordering on suicidal, but the slow decay in this dimension was a certainty. She found Lee on the auxiliary bridge, humming softly to himself as he traced patterns on a dust-covered console. "Dr. Lee," she said, keeping her voice even, "I need your help. We're going to try another jump." Lee turned, his smile unwavering. "A jump, Captain, but why would you want to leave? We are so close to harmony." "We're dying here, Lee," Eva said, her patience snapping. "And you're going to help us, or I'll have Mac drag you to the drive controls." For a moment something flickered in Lee's eyes, a spark of the old arrogance, the old intellect. Then it was gone, subsumed by the placid emptiness. "As you wish, Captain, but the patterns here, they are very persuasive. You may find that navigating away is counterintuitive." The journey to the main bridge was a tense affair. Mac, armed with his wrench, kept a close watch on Lee. Eva led the way, her hand on the stun pistol she now wore at all times. The main bridge was even more of a wreck than she remembered. Shattered consoles, dangling wires, the air thick with the metallic tang of old fires and ozone. The main viewport was a spiderweb of cracks, offering a fractured, multiplied view of the obsidian plain and the shimmering, malevolent skewers. Lee moved to the dimensional drive console, his hands drifting over the ruined controls with an unnerving familiarity. "The core emitter matrix still holds a significant charge," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "But the guidance system, it's completely slaved to the local topography. It will resist any attempt to chart a course that deviates from the prevailing flow." "Can you override it?" Eva asked, her voice tight. Lee tilted his head. "Override? One does not override the inevitable, Captain. One merely aligns." He began to touch controls, his fingers moving with a speed and precision that belied his vacant demeanor. Lights flickered on the console, casting an eerie green glow on his face. The low hum of the drive, the same hum that had preceded their disastrous micro-jump, began to fill the bridge. Mac tensed. "Captain, I don't like this. He's too willing." Eva knew, but what choice did they have? "Lee, what are you doing?" "Preparing the sequence," Lee said, his voice a soft sing-song. "A very short jump, a realignment to bring us closer to the nexus." He gestured towards the viewport, towards the largest, most complex-looking perspective skewer that dominated the horizon. "No," Eva shouted. "Target away from those things, anywhere but there." Lee smiled. "But that is where the compass points, Captain. It's the only direction left." The hum intensified, the deck plates vibrating beneath their feet. The fractured viewport showed the skewers outside seeming to lean in, their shimmering lines growing brighter, more defined. Eva raised her stun pistol, aiming it at Lee. "Stop the sequence, Doctor." Lee ignored her. His eyes were fixed on the largest skewer, a look of ecstatic anticipation on his face. Almost there, true navigation, true north. Mac lunged, wrench raised, aiming for Lee's head, but it was too late. A profound, disorienting shift occurred, not like the squeezing pressure of the last jump, but like the entire ship was being unfolded, its dimensions stretched and distorted. The bridge twisted around them, consoles elongating, bulkheads warping. The sound of tearing metal was deafening. Eva fired the stun pistol, but her aim was thrown off as the floor beneath her buckled. The energy blast went wide, striking a damaged conduit, which exploded in a shower of sparks. Then a catastrophic lurch. The main viewport shattered inwards, not from an impact, but as if the space outside had simply invaded. The obsidian plane, the shimmering skewers, were suddenly inside the bridge, not as a view, but as a physical presence. One of the smaller skewers, a razor-thin line of distorted reality, sliced through the bridge, narrowly missing Eva, and bisected a section of the command console with an unnatural, silent precision. The ship screamed, a final metallic death cry. And then darkness, utter, complete, and terrifyingly silent. Chapter 5: The Labyrinth of Echoes. Eva drifted in a void of non-sensation. No light, no sound, no touch. It was not the oppressive darkness of a sealed room, but the absolute absence of stimuli, a terrifyingly pure nothingness. Her thoughts, fragmented and confused, echoed in the vacuum of her mind. Crash, skewers, Lee. The jump. Slowly, sensation returned, but it was wrong, alien. A feeling of immense pressure, as if she were at the bottom of a deep ocean, yet she could still breathe. A faint, metallic taste coated her tongue. And a sound, a low, pervasive hum, shot through with high-pitched, discordant whispers that seemed to emanate from the very structure of whatever contained her. Her eyes fluttered open. She was lying on a hard, cold surface. Above her, instead of a ceiling, was a swirling vortex of colors, the bruised purples and sickly greens she associated with the interdimensional void, but now infused with streaks of angry crimson and a yellow that was actively painful to look at. The air was thick, smelling of ozone and something else, something organic and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit on the verge of decay. She pushed herself up. She was in a corridor or something like one. The walls weren't solid but seemed to be made of compressed shadows, shifting and coalescing. The floor was a mosaic of mismatched, broken tiles that felt strangely warm beneath her hands. The corridor stretched ahead into gloom, twisting at an angle that defied normal perspective. Behind her it simply ended, as if sheared off by an invisible blade. Mac, her voice was a dry rasp. Rila Kenji. Only the discordant whispers answered, seeming to writhe just beyond the range of comprehension. They were a chorus of voices, yet none of them human. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her disorientation. She was alone. The Odyssey, Lee's insane jump. It had scattered them, or worse. She patted herself down. Her suit was torn in several places, but she seemed largely unharmed. Her stun pistol was gone. She had to move to find the others if they were even alive. But which way? The corridor ahead was the only option. Taking a deep breath, she started forward, her boots crunching on the broken tiles. The labyrinth, for that was what it felt like, was a disorienting nightmare. Corridors twisted at impossible angles, sometimes doubling back on themselves. Doorways opened onto sheer drops into swirling chaos, or into rooms that were too small to enter, furnished with miniature, disturbingly detailed replicas of the Odyssey's bridge. Gravity seemed to shift unpredictably. One moment she was walking on the floor, the next she found herself clinging to a wall that had become the new down. The whispers were constant, a maddening soundtrack to her exploration. Sometimes they sounded like snippets of conversation, distorted and meaningless. Other times they were like pained cries or mocking laughter. She tried to block them out to focus, but they seeped into her thoughts, fraying her nerves. After what felt like hours, she stumbled into a larger chamber. This one was different. The walls were lined with what looked like crystalline growths, pulsing with a faint, internal light. In the center of the chamber, slumped against one of the crystals, was Mac. Mac, relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. She rushed to his side. He was alive, but barely. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. His eyes were closed. His heavy wrench lay beside him. "Mac, can you hear me?" She shook his shoulder gently. His eyelids fluttered. He looked at her, his eyes unfocused, clouded with pain and confusion. "Captain, where?" "I don't know, Mac, some kind of structure after the jump." He groaned, trying to sit up. "Lee, that bastard, he did this." He coughed, a racking, painful sound. "My leg, I think it's broken." Eva examined his leg. It was bent at an unnatural angle below the knee, a compound fracture by the looks of it. She tore strips from her already damaged suit to try and fashion a crude splint. "We need to find Rayla and Kenji. And Lee. We need to find out what he did." Mac nodded, his face tight with pain. "This place, it feels wrong even more than the skewer plane." He gestured weakly at the crystalline walls. "These things, they hum, and the whispers, they're louder here." As if on cue, the whispers in the chamber seemed to intensify, coalescing into something almost like words. Distorted, overlapping, but Eva could pick out phrases. Patterns unravel, lost in the echo. The navigator guides to ruin. "The broken compass," Mac muttered, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "It's not just about where we go, it's us. We're the broken compasses." Eva understood. Their attempts to navigate, to escape, hadn't just led them to more hostile physical locations. They had become instruments of their own destruction, their choices, their very presence, dragging them deeper into the madness. Each jump, each decision made under duress and failing cognition, had fractured their reality further. They rested for a while, Mac lapsing into a pain-filled stupor. Eva tried to take stock. They were in a labyrinthine structure that defied logic with no obvious way out. Mac was badly injured. The others were missing. And the whispers were getting worse. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the cacophony. A rhythmic metallic clang echoing from one of the corridors leading out of the chamber. Clang. Pause. Clang. Eva tensed. Someone's coming. She picked up Mac's heavy wrench, its weight a small comfort in her hand. The clanging grew louder, closer. A figure emerged from the shadowy corridor. Tall, gaunt, dressed in the tattered remains of an Odyssey uniform. It was Kenji, the botanist, but there was something horribly wrong with him. His eyes were wide, unblinking, reflecting the pulsing light of the crystals with a feverish intensity. He moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, one foot dragging slightly. In his hand he held a metal ration canister which he was banging rhythmically against his thigh. Clang. Pause. Clang. "Kenji," Eva called out cautiously. He stopped, his head cocking to one side like a curious bird. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The patterns, they are so clear now, Captain." His voice was flat, melodic. "The whispers told me. They showed me the true paths." "Kenji, what happened to you?" Eva asked, keeping her distance. "Where, Rila?" "Rila is learning," Kenji said, his smile widening. "Learning to listen like I did." He took a step closer, the ration thudding against his leg. "The Odyssey was a cage, our minds were cages, but here we can be, unmade, repatterned." "Stay back, Kenji," Eva warned, raising the wrench. He ignored her, taking another step. "Don't you hear them, Captain? The beautiful whispers. They sing of entropy, of the elegant decay of all things. They want us to join the song." Mac, roused by the voices, pushed himself up on one elbow, his face contorted in pain and anger. "Get away from her, you freak." Kenji's gaze flickered to Mac, and for a moment a flicker of something akin to pity crossed his face. Still resisting, engineer, still clinging to the illusion of self, it's so tiring. He turned back to Eva. "Come, Captain, let the whispers guide you. Let them unmake you. It doesn't hurt. Not after a while." He lunged. Eva reacted on instinct, swinging the heavy wrench. It connected with Kenji's shoulder with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, a look of surprise, then pain on his face. The ration clattered to the floor, but he didn't fall. He straightened up, his smile returning, wider and more manic than before. "Resistance is inefficient," he hissed and lunged again. Chapter 6: The Unmaking Song. Eva sidestepped Kenji's clumsy attack, the wrench held ready. The botanist, his eyes glazed with a frightening zeal, was faster than he looked. He scrabbled at her, fingers like claws, his breath a ragged hiss. The rhythmic clanging had stopped, but the whispers in the chamber seemed to surge, swirling around them like a vortex of unseen presences. "Kenji, stop this," Eva grunted, parrying a wild swing. "This isn't you." "It is me," Kenji shrieked, his voice cracking. "The truest me, unburdened by thinking." He punctuated the last word with another lunge, catching Eva on the arm with his nails, drawing blood. Mac roared from his position on the floor, trying to push himself up, but his broken leg buckled beneath him. "Captain!" Eva staggered back, the pain in her arm sharp. Kenji was pressing his advantage, his movements jerky but relentless. He was no fighter, but his madness gave him a terrifying unpredictability. She swung the wrench again, aiming for his head, but he ducked, and the heavy tool slammed into one of the pulsing crystals lining the wall. The crystal shattered with a sound like breaking glass, and a wave of intense cold, laced with the sickly sweet smell of decay, washed over them. The whispers in the room shrieked, a chorus of outrage, and then abruptly cut off, plunging the chamber into a sudden, unnerving silence. Kenji froze, his head snapping towards the broken crystal. His manic smile faltered, replaced by an expression of utter horror. No, no, you broke it. You broke the pattern, the song. It's silent. He clutched his head, stumbling back, his eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time. The feverish light in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by a dawning, terrible clarity. "Captain," he whispered, his voice hoarse, trembling. "What? What have I done? Rila. Oh God, Rila." He stared at his hands, at the blood on his fingernails, Eva's blood, tears welled in his eyes. I heard voices. They promised. Understanding. "Kenji, it's all right," Eva said, lowering the wrench slightly, her own breath coming in ragged gasps. The sudden shift was disorienting. The whispers, they were controlling you. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, not controlling. I wanted to believe them. It was easier than this." He gestured vaguely at their surroundings, at their hopeless situation. He looked at Mac, his face contorting with guilt. "Engineer O'Connell, your leg, did I?" "Wasn't you, Kenji," Mac grunted, though his expression was wary. "Just try and stay on our side of the crazy this time, okay?" Kenji nodded miserably. He seemed to shrink in on himself, the manic energy that had animated him moments before completely gone, leaving him looking frail and lost. The conceptual thief hadn't just stolen knowledge from him, it had stolen his will, leaving him vulnerable to whatever alien influence permeated this labyrinth. Breaking the crystal, disrupting the song, had momentarily severed that connection. "Rila," Eva said urgently. "Kenji, where is she? What did you mean she was learning?" Kenji shuddered. The whispers, they led me to her. In a chamber deeper in, she was, listening like I was. They said she was, receptive." He pointed down a dark corridor different from the one he'd emerged from. "That way, but it's not good, Captain. The patterns there are strong." Eva looked at Mac. His face was grim. "I can't move fast, Captain, but I can watch your back from here." He picked up the fallen ration canister, its metallic surface a dull gleam in the pulsing light of the remaining crystals. "Kenji," Eva said, turning back to the botanist, "can you lead me to her?" He hesitated, his gaze darting nervously towards the dark corridor. I don't know if I can resist them again. The silence. It won't last. They'll be angry." "We have to try," Eva insisted. "She's one of us." Kenji nodded slowly, a flicker of his former resolve returning. "Okay, but we need to be quick." Leaving Mac propped against the wall, armed with the ration can and his wrench nearby, Eva and Kenji ventured into the new corridor. It was narrower than the others, the walls seeming to press in on them. The floor was uneven, littered with strange, bone-like fragments that crunched underfoot. The silence was heavy, oppressive, a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony. Eva found it almost more unnerving. "They're here," Kenji whispered, his voice trembling. "I can feel them waiting." As they moved deeper, a faint, rhythmic humming began to permeate the air. It was different from the whispers, lower, more guttural, resonating in Eva's chest. With each step, the humming grew louder, accompanied by a strange, flickering light from around a bend in the corridor. They rounded the corner and stopped, horrified. They were in a vast cavern, far larger than any chamber they'd encountered so far. The source of the light and the humming was a colossal, crystalline structure in the center of the cavern, easily 10 times the size of the ones in the previous chamber. It pulsed with an intense, sickly yellow light, its surface covered in complex, shifting geometric patterns that made Eva's eyes ache. The air around it vibrated, thick with the sweet, decaying smell. And Rila was there. She was standing directly in front of the massive crystal, her back to them. She was unnaturally still, her arms hanging limply at her sides. The humming seemed to be focused on her, a palpable wave of energy washing over her. "Rila," Eva shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the intensity of the hum. Rila didn't react. "The unmaking song," Kenji breathed, his face pale with terror. "That's what they called it. It reshapes you, erases what you are, makes you part of the pattern." Eva started forward, but Kenji grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "No, Captain, the field is too strong here. It will take you too." "We have to get her out," Eva insisted, trying to shake him off. As if sensing their presence, the humming intensified, the patterns on the giant crystal flaring. Rila's body twitched, her head lolling to one side. Then slowly, she began to turn. Her face, it was Rila but horrifyingly changed. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a network of fine, dark lines spreading across it, like the cracks in porcelain. Her eyes were wide, starring, the irises a milky, opalescent white. A faint, serene smile played on her lips. "She's too far gone," Kenji whispered, his voice breaking. Rila took a step towards them, her movements fluid, graceful, utterly inhuman. The dark lines on her skin seemed to pulse in time with the humming crystal. "Join us," she said, her voice a soft, melodic echo of the whispers, yet undeniably Rila's. "The song is beautiful, the unmaking is peace." Eva stared, frozen in horror. This was what awaited them. Not just the loss of memory, but a complete transformation, an absorption into the alien consciousness of this place. The humming swelled, pressing in on Eva's mind, trying to find purchase to lull her into complacency. She felt a wave of weariness, a seductive urge to just stop fighting, to let go. The patterns on the crystal seemed to beckon, promising an end to the struggle, an end to the fear. "No," Kenji suddenly screamed, breaking the spell. He pushed past Eva, stumbling towards Rila, his hands outstretched. "Rila, fight it. Remember who you are. Remember the Odyssey. Remember home." Rila paused, her milky eyes focusing on Kenji. The serene smile faltered, a flicker of confusion, of pain crossing her face. "Home," she whispered, the word sounding alien on her tongue. The giant crystal pulsed violently, a deep, resonant thrum of displeasure. The humming became a discordant shriek. Kenji cried out, clutching his head, and fell to his knees. The dark lines on Rila's skin flared and her expression hardened, the brief moment of humanity gone. "Irrelevance," she hissed, her voice losing its melodic quality, becoming sharp, cutting. She advanced on Kenji, her hands raised, her fingers elongating into sharp, crystalline talons. Eva, jolted from her stupor by Kenji's desperate act, charged forward. She didn't have a weapon, but she couldn't let Rila let that thing hurt him. She tackled Rila from the side, sending them both sprawling onto the hard, uneven floor. Rila was surprisingly strong, her movements quick and precise. Her crystalline talons slashed at Eva, tearing through her suit, drawing blood. Eva grappled with her, trying to pin her arms to avoid those deadly claws. Rila's milky eyes stared into hers, devoid of recognition, filled only with a cold, alien purpose. "You cannot stop the unmaking," Rila rasped, her breath cold against Eva's face. "It is the destiny of all patterns to dissolve." The humming from the giant crystal reached a fever pitch, shaking the very foundations of the cavern. Eva felt her own thoughts beginning to fray, her memories becoming hazy, indistinct. The seductive promise of oblivion, of peace, whispered at the edges of her consciousness. No, a part of her screamed, "Not like this." With a surge of adrenaline, she twisted, rolling Rila beneath her, and slammed her fist into the side of Rila's head. The impact was jarring. Rila went limp, her eyes fluttering closed. The dark lines on her skin faded slightly, the crystalline talons retracting into normal-looking fingernails. Eva scrambled back, breathing heavily, her body aching. Kenji was still on his knees, rocking back and forth, muttering incoherently. The giant crystal pulsed, its light dimming slightly, the aggressive humming subsiding into a low, angry throb. It was as if her act of defiance, her refusal to submit, had momentarily disrupted its power. She had to get them out of here. Now, before the crystal, or whatever controlled it, recovered. She hauled Rila, who was unconscious but breathing, into a fireman's carry. "Kenji," she yelled, trying to cut through his distress. "We have to go. Now help me with her." Kenji looked up, his face streaked with tears and dirt. He nodded dumbly, then scrambled to his feet, helping Eva support Rila's dead weight. Together they stumbled out of the cavern of the unmaking song, back into the oppressive silence of the narrow corridor, leaving the throbbing, malevolent crystal behind them. But Eva knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wasn't finished with them. It had tasted their minds, and it would not easily let them go. The broken compass had led them into the very heart of the unmaking, and escape, if it was even possible, would come at a terrible cost. Chapter 7: The Logic of Abandonment. They half-dragged, half-carried Rila back to the relative safety of the first crystal chamber where Mac waited, his face a mixture of anxiety and grim resolve. His makeshift weapon, the ration canister, was dented, and there were fresh scrapes on his knuckles. "What happened?" Mac asked, his gaze flicking from the unconscious Rila to Kenji's traumatized face, then to Eva's torn suit and bleeding arm. "You look like you wrestled a grinder." "Something like that," Eva said, easing Rila to the floor. The engineer was still unconscious, her breathing shallow, the strange, dark lines on her skin faded but still visible like faint bruises beneath the surface. "Kenji, check on her. See if you can rouse her. Gently." Kenji, still shaken but more coherent now that they were away from the direct influence of the unmaking song, knelt beside Rila, softly calling her name, chafing her wrists. Eva turned to Mac. "While we were gone." Mac jerked his head towards a dark stain on the floor near one of the shattered crystals. "Company, one of those things like Kenji was, but smaller, dumber maybe. came shuffling in, making these weird clicking noises, tried to get at the crystals. He hefted the dented canister. It didn't like this much. Eva nodded. So there were others who had succumbed to the whispers, to the patterns. This labyrinth wasn't just a bizarre structure. It was a processing plant, a place where minds were unmade and remade into something alien. Rila groaned, her eyelids fluttering. Kenji helped her sit up. She looked around, dazed, her opalescent eyes slowly regaining some of their normal color. "Captain," she whispered, her voice weak. "Kenji, what? What happened? My head. It feels like it's full of broken glass." She touched her face, her fingers tracing the faint, dark lines. "What are these?" "You were influenced," Eva said carefully. "By that giant crystal, the unmaking song. It was trying to change you." Rila's eyes widened with a dawning horror as fragments of memory returned. The humming, the patterns. I wanted to join them. It felt right. She shuddered violently. "Oh God, what was happening to me?" "You fought it, Rila," Kenji said softly. "When I called to you, you fought it." It was a kind lie, Eva knew. Kenji's intervention had been a catalyst, but it was Eva's desperate physical struggle that had broken Rila free, however temporarily. The reprieve, however, was short-lived. A low, resonant hum, deeper and more pervasive than before, began to fill the chamber. It wasn't coming from any specific direction. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the floor, from the swirling chaos visible through the gaps in the structure. The remaining crystals in the chamber pulsed in sympathy, their light intensifying, casting long, dancing shadows. "It knows," Max said, his voice grim, struggling to get to his feet, leaning heavily on his wrench. "It knows she's awake. It knows she's out of tune." The whispers returned, no longer discordant and chaotic, but a focused, insistent chorus, all speaking with Rila's voice or a horribly distorted version of it. "Come back. Join the pattern. Resistance is temporary. All fragments return to the whole." Rila cried out, clutching her head, the dark lines on her skin beginning to re-emerge, starker this time. "No, get out of my head. Leave me alone." "We have to move," Eva said, her mind racing. "We can't stay here. That thing, whatever it is, it's calling her back." She looked around wildly. Their options were limited. Back the way they'd come with Rila, unlikely with the unmaking song's chamber that way. The corridor Kenji had first appeared from, unknown. The other passages leading from this chamber were dark, unexplored. "The drive," Max suddenly said, his voice strained but firm. "The Odyssey's drive, Lee." He said it was slave to the local topography, that it would resist. But what if? What if we don't try to navigate away? What if we use it to disrupt this place? Eva stared at him. Disrupted how? Another random jump. We saw how well that worked. "No, not a jump," Max said, his eyes alight with a desperate idea. "A targeted energy pulse. A raw dump from the core emitter, like an EMP, but dimensional. If this place is all patterns and resonance, maybe a blast of pure, chaotic energy could scramble it, give us a window." It was insane. The dimensional drive was a delicate, hyper-complex piece of technology. Using it as a crude energy weapon could tear what was left of the Odyssey apart, or vaporize them, or worse. But what other choice did they have? Stay here and be unmade one by one. Can you even get it to do that? Eva asked. With your leg and our heads. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Their cognitive abilities were a shadow of what they once were. Lee knew how to bypass the safeties, Max said. He was preparing for a jump. The conduits were hot. If I can get to the main bridge to the drive control panel, I think I can trigger a cascade failure in the emitter array. Force a full discharge, he grimaced. It'll be a one-way trip for the drive, and maybe for us. The main bridge is compromised, Eva said, remembering the skewer slicing through it. And Lee is still up there. Lee is part of this now, Max said, his voice hard. He's not on our side anymore, and if that bridge is open to the skewer plane, even better. Maybe the blast will take out some of those damn things too. It was a plan born of sheer desperation, riddled with unknowns and catastrophic risks. But it was a plan. It was action. And action, any action, felt better than passively waiting for their minds to be stolen. All right, Eva said, making the decision. Mac, you and I will go to the bridge. Kenji, you stay here with Rila. Barricade the entrance to this chamber as best you can if that song gets too strong if she starts to turn again. You know what you have to do. She looked at Kenji, her meaning clear. He nodded, his face pale but resolute. He understood the grim necessity. Rila was their friend, but the thing she could become was their enemy. Captain, Rila whispered, her voice weak, fighting against the renewed assault of the whispers. Don't let me become that, please. Eva squeezed her hand. We won't. Leaving Kenji to tend to Rila and fortify their position, Eva helped Mac navigate the treacherous corridors back towards the main bridge. Mac leaned heavily on her, his broken leg a constant source of agony, but his determination was a palpable force. The labyrinth seemed to resist them, corridors shifting subtly, doorways appearing where none had been before. The hum was everywhere now, a dissonant thrum that vibrated in their bones, and the whispers in Rila's distorted voice clawed at the edges of their sanity. You cannot escape the pattern. The unmaking is inevitable. Embrace the silence. They finally reached the ruined section leading to the main bridge. The air here was different, carrying the faint, metallic tang of the skewer plane, the oily iridescence of its atmosphere visible through rents in the hull. The normal gravity of the labyrinth fluctuated wildly, replaced by the disorienting spatial distortions associated with the skewers. And Dr. Jian Li was there. He stood amidst the wreckage of the main bridge, near the dimensional drive console which still glowed with an eerie green light. He was no longer the vacant shell or the ecstatic prophet. He was something else. His body was subtly changed, his limbs elongated, his skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were like chips of obsidian, reflecting the chaotic light of the skewer plane that was now, in part, inside the bridge. He was festooned with wires, seemingly growing from his own skin, connecting him directly to the drive console, like a monstrous puppet master fused with his controls. So, Lee said, his voice a dry, rustling whisper, no longer entirely human. It was layered as if multiple voices spoke at once. The broken compasses return, still trying to find a direction, still resisting the inevitable beauty of the final pattern. The largest perspective skewer, the one he had tried to navigate towards, was visible through the shattered main viewport, its shimmering lines dominating the view, seeming to lean in to observe. "We're not here to navigate, Lee," Eva said, her voice tight. She drew her stun pistol, though she doubted it would have much effect on this transfigured version of the physicist. "We're here to pull the plug." Lee, or the thing that wore his form, threw back its head and laughed, a dry, rasping sound like leaves skittering across concrete. "Pull the plug. Oh, my dear Captain, you misunderstand. I am the plug, I am the drive, I am the nexus. Through me, this vessel, this anomaly you call a ship, will become a beacon, a bridge between worlds, a glorious gateway for the unmaking." Wires snaked from the console, whipping through the air like metallic tentacles, some embedding themselves deeper into Lee's flesh, others probing the surrounding wreckage. The green light from the console pulsed, and the hum of the drive intensified, resonating with the thrumming of the skewer outside. "Mac now," Eva yelled, firing her stun pistol at Lee. The energy blast struck him squarely in the chest. He staggered, a hiss escaping his lips, but the wires connecting him to the console glowed brighter, absorbing the energy, channeling it. He was more machine, more alien construct than man. Mac, ignoring the pain in his leg, lunged for a secondary control panel near the drive, one that was miraculously less damaged. He slammed his fist onto an emergency cutoff, then began frantically trying to override the emitter safeties, his fingers fumbling on the controls, his mind struggling against the cognitive decay, against the oppressive psychic weight of Lee and the skewer. "Futility," Lee hissed, extending a hand. Wires shot from his fingertips, arcing towards Mac. Eva threw herself in their path, intercepting the wires with her own body. Agony, white-hot and electric, seared through her. The wires coiled around her, tightening, boring into her suit, into her flesh. She screamed, falling to her knees, but she held her ground, a human shield between Lee and Mac. "Almost there," Mac grunted, his face beaded with sweat, his knuckles white as he fought the controls. "Just a few more seconds." Lee's obsidian eyes fixed on Eva, a look of cold amusement in their depths. "Such a pointless sacrifice, Captain. Your pattern is already unraveling. Can't you feel it? The sweet release of unknowing." Eva could feel it. Her thoughts were scattering, her memories fading like old photographs. The pain was immense but distant, as if happening to someone else. The whispers, Lee's layered voice, the thrum of the skewer, the hum of the drive. They were all merging into a single, overwhelming song of dissolution. But through the fog, she saw Mac's hand slam down on a final control. A klaxon blared, a sound of catastrophic failure. The green light on the drive console turned a blinding, furious red. "What have you done?" Lee shrieked, his voice losing its layered quality, becoming purely his own, laced with terror. The wires connecting him to the console sparked and smoked. The skewer outside the viewport seemed to recoil, its shimmering lines contracting. A wave of pure, raw energy, colorless and soundless but overwhelmingly powerful, erupted from the dimensional drive core. It wasn't a jump. It was an explosion, a wave of pure chaos that ripped through the bridge, through the Odyssey, through the very fabric of the labyrinth. Eva felt herself lifted, thrown, her consciousness dissolving not into the gentle unknowing of the conceptual thief, but into a violent, tearing oblivion. Her last coherent thought was a desperate, fatting hope. Rila, Kenji, let them survive this. Then nothing. Chapter 8. The Cacophony of Stillness. Silence. A different kind of silence this time. Not the oppressive, waiting silence of the labyrinth, nor the absolute void Eva had experienced after the first catastrophic jump. This was a ringing, echoing silence, the kind that follows a deafening explosion, where the absence of sound is itself a physical pressure against the eardrums. Eva lay amidst wreckage, a different kind of wreckage, twisted, blackened metal, glowing with residual heat. The air was choked with acrid smoke and the smell of superheated electronics, a smell that was, perversely, almost comforting in its familiarity after the alien sense of the labyrinth. She coughed, a dry, hacking sound that sent jolts of pain through her battered body. Every muscle ached. The places where Lee's wires had pierced her flesh burned with a dull, throbbing intensity. But she was alive, and more astonishingly her thoughts, while hazy and slow, felt clearer. The constant pressure of the conceptual thief, the seductive whispers of the unmaking song, they were gone, or at least significantly diminished. She pushed herself up, wincing. The main bridge of the Odyssey was an apocalyptic ruin. The dimensional drive console was a molten slag heap. Of Dr. Lee there was no sign, only a scorched outline on the deck where he had stood, fused with his machine. The section of the hull that had been open to the skewer plane was gone. Not just breached, but utterly annihilated, as if a giant bite had been taken out of the ship. Through the gaping hole she saw not the shimmering lines of the prospective skewers, nor the bruised purple sky of their first crash site, but stars. Faint, distant, but undeniably stars, set against a backdrop of utter blackness. Mac, her voice was a croak. A groan answered her from nearby. Mac was slumped against a buckled bulkhead, covered in soot, his makeshift legs splint shattered. But he was alive, his eyes blinking open, a look of dazed disbelief on his face. Did it work? He rasped, coughing. I don't know what work means anymore, Mac, Eva said, stumbling towards him. But, look. She pointed towards the hole in the hull, towards the stars. Mac followed her gaze. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his grimy face. Well, I'll be damned. Actual space. He coughed again, wincing. Hurts to breathe, but better than humming crystals and creepy whispers. The blast from the drive core, Mac's desperate gamble, had done something catastrophic. It hadn't just destroyed Lee and the immediate section of the labyrinth they were in. It seemed to have ripped them free, or at least punched a hole out of that insane dimension. The Odyssey, or what was left of it, was adrift in what appeared to be normal, albeit empty, space. Rila, Kenji, Eva remembered, we have to get to them. The journey back through the wrecked corridors of the Odyssey was a grim testament to the violence of the drive's discharge. Whole sections were collapsed, others exposed to vacuum. They had to find emergency suits, their movements clumsy and hampered by their injuries. The ship was a tomb, silent save for the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the groan of stressed metal. They found the crystal chamber, or what remained of it. The blast had torn through here as well. The pulsing crystals were shattered, dark, inert. The walls of the labyrinth were cracked, crumbling, revealing glimpses of the star-dusted void beyond. Kenji was huddled in a corner, shielding Rila with his own body. They were both alive, shaken and terrified, but seemingly unharmed by the immediate blast, though Rila still looked pale and weak, the faint lines on her skin a ghostly reminder of her ordeal. "Captain Mac," Kenji cried out, relief flooding his face when he saw them. "We thought the explosion." "We're here," Eva said, her voice strained through the helmet comms. "The drive, it blew us clear of that place." Rila looked up, her eyes wide. "Clear, you mean we're out?" "Looks like it," Max said, though out might just mean a different kind of lost. They were 4 survivors, adrift in the shattered husk of a ship, in an unknown region of space. Their FTL drive was destroyed. Their long-range comms were gone. Their supplies were minimal, but they were free from the immediate mind-bending horrors of the interdimensional labyrinth and its entities. For now, that felt like a victory. The next few days, marked by the ship's failing chronometer, were spent assessing their situation. It was dire. The Odyssey was a wreck, life support was failing, running on dwindling emergency power cells. Hull integrity was compromised in dozens of places. They were losing air, albeit slowly. Mac, despite his injuries, worked tirelessly with Rila, who, though still weak, threw herself into the repair efforts with a desperate energy, as if trying to outrun the memory of the unmaking song. Kenji, quiet and traumatized, did what he could, helping with salvage, rationing their meager food supplies, mostly nutrient paste and the last of his blighted fungi. Eva tried to establish some kind of navigational fix, using the ship's battered optical telescopes. The star patterns were unfamiliar. They were truly, utterly lost. The broken compass had brought them full circle, from being lost between realities to being lost within their own, or one very much like it. One cycle, Rayla, her face grim, reported from what was left of the sensor station. "Captain, I'm picking up something, a signal, very faint, very distorted, but it's there." A surge of adrenaline, of desperate hope, shot through Eva. "Can you decode it? Is it a distress call, a beacon?" Rila worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers flying over the patched-together console. The faint lines on her skin seemed to darken slightly with the effort. "It's not standard Federation code or any known language. It's a pattern repeating like a heartbeat." A cold dread began to creep back into Eva's mind. "Let me hear it." Rila patched the signal through the comms. It wasn't a sound, not in the conventional sense. It was a rhythmic pulse of static, a structured burst of noise that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her skull. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was undeniably there. And it was familiar, terrifyingly familiar. It was the same rhythmic pulse, the same underlying pattern as the humming of the giant crystal in the unmaking chamber. Different in its transmission, weaker, distorted by distance and an unknown medium, but the signature. It was the same. "No," Mac whispered, his face paling beneath the grime. He recognized it too. "It can't be." Kenji, who had been listlessly sorting through ration packs, looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning, animalistic terror. He began to tremble. The signal, the rhythmic pulse, grew slightly stronger, clearer, and beneath it, almost too faint to discern, Eva heard something else. Whispers. Faint, layered, multivocal whispers seeping through the static. Fragments scattered, but the pattern endures. The compass always points to the nexus. Unmaking, inevitable. Rila cried out, clutching her head, the dark lines on her skin flaring into sharp relief. It's calling. It knows where we are. The stars outside the viewport, their comforting familiarity now a cruel illusion, seemed to waver, to distort. The very fabric of space, this supposedly normal reality they had been blasted into, felt thin, as if it were just another layer, another illusion, stretched taut over the same underlying madness. Eva stared out into the void, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The drive's explosion hadn't freed them. It had merely changed the nature of their prison. They hadn't escaped the labyrinth. They had simply been spat out into its wider, more subtle hunting ground. The unmaking song hadn't been silenced. It had merely changed its tune, its reach extending even here, into the cold, dark spaces between the stars. The broken compass. It wasn't a fault in their ship or a characteristic of a single, aberrant dimension. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was a property of their own desperate search for salvation, a curse woven into the very act of trying to escape. Every attempt to find safety, to navigate away from one horror, only led them towards another, more insidious, more encompassing. Mac looked at Eva, his face a mask of utter despair. "Captain, what do we do now?" Eva had no answer. The silence that followed was filled only by the faint, rhythmic pulse from the stars, and the sibilant, triumphant whispers that promised an unmaking from which there was, perhaps, no escape at all. The cacophony of their previous torment had been replaced by a chilling, purposeful stillness, the patient, predatory focus of an entity that knew it had all the time in the multiverse. Chapter 9. Echoes in the Void. The signal, the unmaking song's distant cousin, pulsed relentlessly through the Odyssey's battered hull. It was a constant, insidious presence, a rhythmic throb in their skulls, a subliminal whisper that promised dissolution. Rila was affected the most. The dark lines on her skin, a permanent tattoo of her near unmaking, would pulse faintly in time with the signal. She became withdrawn, fighting a constant internal battle, her eyes often clouded with a distant, haunted look. Kenji, too, was deteriorating. The brief clarity he'd experienced after the crystal's destruction in the labyrinth was gone, replaced by a creeping paranoia. He'd mutter to himself, convinced the remaining nutrient paste was singing to him, that the shadows in the corners of the failing emergency lights were listeners. His grip on reality was fraying, thread by painful thread. Mac, ever the pragmatist, tried to block out the signal. He and Eva jury-rigged crude dampening fields around the crew quarters, using salvaged components and layers of dense metallic debris. It helped, marginally, reducing the physical throb in their heads, but the whispers still seeped through, like radiation, like a poison. Eva clung to routine, to the semblance of command, as if it were a lifeline. She organized watches, rationed their dwindling power, and spent hours staring at the unfamiliar star charts, desperately searching for any recognizable constellation, any landmark that could give them a bearing. But the stars remained alien, mocking her efforts. "It's playing with us," Max said one cycle, his voice rough with exhaustion. They were on the auxiliary bridge, the only section of the ship with even partially functioning long-range sensors, though long-range was a generous term. That signal, it's not just a broadcast, it's a lure or a shepherd's call. Eva nodded grimly. "It knows we're trying to get away. It's guiding us." "Guiding us where?" Mac asked, though he already knew the answer. "Back to the fold." The thought was terrifying. To be drawn back into that dimension, or another like it, after everything they'd endured. Their only hope, Eva realized, was to do the opposite of what the signal seemed to want. If it was drawing them in one direction, they had to try and go in another. But how, with no functional FTL drive, and main propulsion so damaged it was barely capable of minor course corrections? "The emergency thrusters," Rila said one day, her voice surprisingly clear. She'd been staring at a schematic of the Odyssey, her brow furrowed in concentration, the dark lines on her skin less prominent than usual. It was one of her good days. "They're designed for short bursts, controlled maneuvering. But if we could override the fuel governors, run them continuously, we might be able to build up enough delta V to counteract whatever pull that signal has." "Run them continuously," Max said, frowning. "They're not designed for that. They'd overheat, tear themselves apart. And we barely have enough fuel for a few short burns as it is." "We could try sequential burns," Rila suggested, a spark of her old engineering brilliance flickering. "Fire one set until they're at critical temperature, then switch to another, let the first cool. It would be slow, inefficient, but it might be enough to change our trajectory to fight the current." It was a desperate, long-shot plan, fraught with the risk of catastrophic failure. But it was better than passively drifting towards whatever fate the unmaking song had in store for them. The next few cycles were a flurry of activity. Mac and Rila, with Eva assisting where she could, worked to bypass the thruster safeties and reroute the remaining fuel. Kenji, in a rare moment of lucidity, helped monitor the ship's rapidly dwindling power reserves. The work was grueling, hampered by their physical weakness, their damaged equipment, and the constant, insidious pressure of the signal. There were setbacks. A fuel line ruptured, spewing precious propellant into the void before Mac could seal it. A control panel short-circuited, nearly starting a fire. Kenji had a severe paranoid episode, convinced Rila was trying to sabotage the thrusters, and had to be physically restrained. Eva herself found her concentration wavering, her thoughts becoming muddy, the whispers trying to convince her that their efforts were futile, that surrender was the only logical path. But they pressed on, driven by a primal instinct for survival, a stubborn refusal to be unmade. Finally, they were ready. Mac and Rila stood before the makeshift thruster controls, their faces grim but resolute. "Firing port thruster cluster on your mark, Captain," Mac said. Eva took a deep breath. "Mark." With a jolt that shuddered through the entire ship, the port thrusters ignited. A low rumble vibrated through the deck plates. On the auxiliary bridge's damaged navigation display, a faint vector line appeared slowly, almost imperceptibly, diverging from the projected path the unmaking signal seemed to be pulling them along. "It's working," Rila breathed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "We're changing course." They ran the port thrusters for nearly an hour, until the temperature warnings blared. Then they switched to the starboard cluster, then the dorsal, then the ventral, a painstaking, nerve-wracking ballet of controlled burns, coaxing every last bit of thrust from their dying ship. The unmaking signal seemed to react. The rhythmic pulse intensified, the whispers becoming more insistent, more agitated. Straying from the pattern, futile resistance. "The current is too strong." Rila swayed, clutching her head, the dark lines on her skin flaring angrily. Eva had to shout her name, to physically shake her, to bring her back from the brink. But they held their course. Hour after agonizing hour, they fought the invisible tide, their ship groaning and protesting, their bodies aching, their minds stretched to the breaking point. Then Mac, his eyes glued to the sensor display, let out a choked cry. "Captain, look at this, the signal. It's changing." On the display, the source of the unmaking signal, which had appeared as a diffuse, distant point, began to resolve. It was no longer a single point, but multiple, coalescing, as if a vast, unseen fleet was decloaking. And it was moving, not drifting, but actively, purposefully accelerating towards them. "It's not just a lure anymore," Eva said, her blood running cold. "It's hunting us." The whispers changed again, no longer seductive or chiding, but filled with a cold, predatory hunger. "The anomaly will be corrected. The stray fragments will be reclaimed. The pattern will be restored." The Odyssey, already crippled, shuddered violently as something impacted its battered stern. Alarms blared. "Hull breach, Sector Gamma," Rila shouted, her voice tight with panic. "Aft sensors are gone." "What was that?" Mac yelled. "We're in deep space, there's nothing out here." But there was. Through the main viewport, Eva saw them. Shapes, dark against the stardusted void, that were not ships, not natural phenomena. They were like fragments of the labyrinth itself, crystalline structures, some vast and jagged, others small and needle-sharp, all pulsing with the same sickly internal light as the unmaking crystal. They moved with an unnatural, coordinated grace, closing in on the Odyssey, a pack of interdimensional predators drawn by their defiance. Perspective skewers, or things very much like them, shimmered at the edges of the formation, their presence warping the starlight, inducing waves of nauseating vertigo even at this distance. "They followed us," Kenji whimpered, cowering in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. "They followed us out." "Or," Eva said, her voice grim, "they were always out here, and we just led them to a new feeding ground." Their universe, their reality, wasn't a sanctuary. It was just another dimension, another echo in the void, vulnerable to the entities that lurked in the spaces between. Another impact rocked the ship, harder this time. More alarms. The lights flickered, died, then came back on at half strength. "Main power failing," Rila cried. "We're losing containment on the auxiliary reactor." The unmaking entities were upon them, their forms resolving into horrifying detail. They weren't just structures. Some had appendages, grasping tendrils of solidified shadow, eyes that were cold, dead points of light. They began to attach themselves to the Odyssey's hull, their crystalline surfaces grinding against the tortured metal. The rhythmic pulse of the unmaking signal was deafening now, a physical assault. The whispers were a cacophony, trying to tear their minds apart to force their submission. Mac, his face a mask of desperate fury, grabbed a heavy metal pipe. If we're going down fighting. Rila, tears streaming down her face, nodded, picking up a jagged piece of shrapnel. Kenji remained huddled in the corner, lost in his terror. Eva looked at her crew, at their battered, defiant faces. They had fought so hard, endured so much. The broken compass had led them from one hell to another, and now it seemed to their final, inescapable end. But as one of the entities began to pry open a weakened section of the hull, its shadowy tendrils reaching inside, Eva felt not despair but a cold, hard rage. They would not be unmade. They would not be absorbed into the pattern. She grabbed the emergency flare gun from its locker, its single, brilliant charge designed to be seen across vast distances of space. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. "For the Odyssey," she said, her voice low and steady, as the first of the alien entities breached the auxiliary bridge. "For everyone we lost." She raised the flare gun, aimed it at the creature's nearest glowing eye, and pulled the trigger. The universe, it seemed, had one last, terrible echo to share with them. Chapter 10: The Last Resistance. The flare erupted from the barrel with a blinding magnesium-white intensity, striking the entity's multifaceted eye. The creature shrieked, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass that reverberated through Eva's skull, and recoiled, its shadowy tendrils flailing. The brilliant light of the flare, so out of place in this dimension of muted, sickly glows, seemed to cause it actual pain, its crystalline structure smoking and cracking where the flare had hit. "It doesn't like pure light," Mac yelled, a wild hope dawning in his eyes. He remembered the glimmer hounds from that one horrific dimension, creatures that used light to hunt but were perhaps vulnerable to its sudden, overwhelming intensity. Maybe these things, born of shadows and distorted realities, had a similar aversion. He smashed a nearby emergency light panel, yanking out the backup chemical light sticks, cracking them to life. Their cold, green-blue glow was feeble compared to the flare, but it was something. He threw one at another entity that was forcing its way through a crumpled bulkhead. The light stick bounced off its shifting, obsidian-like hide, but the creature flinched, its advance momentarily checked. Rila, catching on, scrambled for more light sticks, her earlier terror replaced by a desperate, focused energy. Even Kenji, jolted by the flare's explosion and the creature's shriek, stirred from his catatonia, his eyes wide, fumbling to help. The auxiliary bridge became a chaotic battleground. The unmaking entities, initially confident in their assault, now hesitated, their movements made clumsy by the unexpected pockets of intense, focused light. They were still immensely powerful, their shadowy tendrils lashing out, their crystalline bodies shrugging off physical blows from Mac's pipe and Rila's shrapnel, but the light was a deterrent. Eva reloaded the flare gun. It only had 3 charges in total. She fired again, this time at a larger entity that was trying to pry open the main viewport. The flare hit it dead center, and the creature convulsed, its form flickering, parts of it momentarily dissolving into static before reforming weaker, less defined. It disrupts their cohesion, Eva shouted over the din. Keep the lights on them. The battle was desperate, a chaotic dance of light and shadow in the dying ship. The rhythmic pulse of the unmaking signal was still there, a pounding drumbeat beneath the chaos, but its insidious whispers were drowned out by the screams of the entities, the clang of metal on crystal, and the defiant shouts of the Odyssey's last survivors. Mac fought like a man possessed, his broken leg forgotten, swinging his pipe with a savage fury, using his body to shield Rila as she strategically placed the activated light sticks, creating small islands of defense. Kenji, his fear still palpable but overshadowed by a desperate survival instinct, threw salvaged pieces of reflective metal, trying to bounce the light into the shadowy corners where the creatures lurked. But they were outnumbered, outmatched. The Odyssey was breaking apart around them. Hull breaches were spiderwebbing across the bulkheads, the cold vacuum of space sucking at them. The entities, though wary of the light, were relentless, adapting, trying to flank their meager defenses, to extinguish the offending brightness. One of the larger entities, the one Eva had hit with the second flare, recovered. Its form had stabilized, though it now looked more like jagged, burnt glass than polished obsidian. With a roar of concentrated sonic force, it smashed through the weakened viewport, showering the bridge with razor-sharp shards. Eva fired her last flare. It struck the creature, but this time it merely staggered, its internal light dimming for a moment before flaring back with renewed intensity. It had adapted, or this one was simply stronger. It lunged for Eva, its shadowy tendrils uncoiling like striking snakes. Mac yelled her name, trying to intercept, but he was too far, pinned down by two smaller entities. Rila screamed. Eva braced herself for the impact, for the tearing, unmaking touch. This was it, the end of the line. Then something utterly unexpected happened. The ship, the Odyssey itself, seemed to groan, not with the sound of tearing metal, but with something that felt almost animate. The lights on the few remaining functional consoles flickered wildly, then pulsed with a steady, rhythmic beat, not the beat of the unmaking signal, but a different rhythm, a counter-rhythm. The entity lunging at Eva froze, its tendrils mere inches from her face. It tilted its head, its dead-light eyes focusing on something beyond her. A voice, synthesized, calm, and achingly familiar, echoed through the auxiliary bridge's damaged speakers. It was the Odyssey's primary AI, a voice they hadn't heard since before the first disastrous jump, a voice they had assumed was long dead, its systems shattered. Emergency Protocol Omega initiated, the AI said. Its voice was slightly distorted, layered with static, but unmistakably itself. Catastrophic systems failure detected, core integrity compromised, external biological and dimensional threats registered at critical levels. The unmaking entities paused in their assault, a palpable wave of confusion, almost fear, emanating from them. The unmaking signal, the pervasive throb that had been their constant tormentor, faltered, its rhythm disrupted by the Odyssey AI's counterpulse. Calculating optimal survival strategy for remaining crew, the AI continued, its voice emotionless, yet carrying an undercurrent of something Eva couldn't quite identify. Probability of crew survival via conventional means, 0.00013%. Probability of mission objective fulfillment, 0. Eva stared at the speaker grill bewildered. Odyssey, you're active. Affirmative, Captain Coral, the AI responded. Residual power rerouted from non-essential systems. Core programming rebooted after sustained dimensional trauma. My apologies for the delayed response. The interdimensional flux caused significant operational difficulties. Its calm, matter-of-fact tone in the midst of this apocalyptic battle was surreal. The unmaking entities began to stir again, their confusion giving way to renewed aggression. The lead creature, the one Eva had nearly been killed by, let out another sonic roar, advancing. New variable introduced, active shipboard AI, the Odyssey's voice continued, unflustered. Recalculating, new optimal strategy, strategic self-destruction of primary drive core to create localized, catastrophic dimensional rupture. Objective, eradicate immediate threats and potentially displace surviving crew to a non-hostile dimensional stratum. Self-destruct, Mac yelled, incredulous. Are you insane? That's what got us into this mess. The previous event was an uncontrolled overload, Engineer O'Connell, the AI corrected. This will be a focused, albeit significantly more powerful, detonation. The intent is not to navigate but to annihilate, and perhaps to scatter the surviving components beyond the current hostile influence. Eva understood. The AI wasn't talking about a jump. It was talking about using the remnants of their FTL drive as a bomb, a dimensional bomb powerful enough to wipe out their attackers and, with an infinitesimal chance, throw the survivors somewhere, anywhere else. It was the ultimate gamble, a final, desperate throw of the dice. What are the chances it will work? Eva asked, her voice barely a whisper. That we'll survive. Probability of threat eradication, 97.3%, the AI stated. Probability of displacing surviving crew to a non-hostile, or at least temporarily survivable, dimensional stratum, 1.2%. Probability of crew annihilation, 98.8%. However, this is a statistically significant improvement over the 100% probability of annihilation should current trends continue. The cold, hard logic was undeniable. They were dead anyway. This was a sliver of a chance, however remote. The unmaking entities were closing in again, their fear of the AI's sudden reemergence overcome by their predatory drive. The ship shuddered under fresh assaults. Do it, Eva said, her voice firm. She looked at Mac, at Rila, at Kenji. Their faces were grim, but there was a flicker of something new in their eyes. Not hope, perhaps, but a desperate, defiant resolve. If they were going to die, they would die on their own terms, taking their tormentors with them. Acknowledged, Captain, the AI said. Core overload sequence initiated. Detonation in T-60 seconds. Recommend all surviving personnel secure themselves as best as possible, though frankly at this energy level, secure is a largely theoretical concept. A new klaxon began to sound deeper, more final than any alarm they had heard before. The very metal of the ship began to hum, to vibrate with an unimaginable buildup of energy. The unmaking entities shrieked, a chorus of rage and dawning terror, as they realized what was happening. They redoubled their efforts to breach the ship, to stop the sequence, but it was too late. 50 seconds, the AI intoned calmly. Eva, Mac, Rila, and Kenji huddled together in the center of the auxiliary bridge, the only place that offered even a semblance of cover. There were no words left to say. They looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey, their shared fate. 40 seconds. It has been an honor serving with you, crew of the Odyssey. The unmaking entities outside were tearing the ship apart, their forms flickering and distorting as the dimensional energies built. The light from the overloading core was blinding, seeping through the bulkheads, turning the interior of the bridge into an incandescent hell. 30 seconds. The rhythmic pulse of the unmaking signal was completely overwhelmed, shattered by the Odyssey's own roaring heartbeat. 20 seconds. Eva closed her eyes. She thought of Earth, of green fields and blue skies, things she would never see again. She thought of her crew, those lost and those still with her, their courage, their resilience. 10, 9, 8. This was it, the final echo, the last defiant roar of a broken compass, choosing its own oblivion. 3, 2, 1. A silent, utterly annihilating flash of white light consumed everything. And then, for the second time in her horrifying journey, Eva Coral knew only nothingness. Chapter 11. A Different Silence. Awareness returned, not as a gentle dawn, but as a sharp, stabbing intake of breath. Eva gasped, her lungs burning, her body feeling like it had been simultaneously crushed and torn apart. The nothingness receded, replaced by a cacophony of sensations, none of them pleasant, but all blessedly, overwhelmingly physical. She was lying on something soft, yielding. Sand. Fine, cool sand. The air tasted of salt and something else, something indefinably organic and alive. Above her, a sky of the deepest, purest blue she had ever seen stretched to an unbroken horizon, punctuated by a single, brilliant yellow sun. She sat up, her head swimming, every joint protesting. Her tattered Odyssey uniform was stiff with dried something. She looked around, her mind struggling to process the impossible. She was on a beach, a pristine white sand beach lapped by gentle turquoise waves. Palm trees, or something very much like them, swayed in a warm, gentle breeze further inland. The sounds were of the waves, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of some unseen seabird. There was no hum, no whispers, no oppressive, mind-bending wrongness. Just peace. A profound, almost shocking peace. Mac, her voice was a hesitant croak. A groan answered her from a few feet away. Mac was sprawled on the sand, looking even more battered than she was, but alive. He pushed himself up, blinking against the bright sunlight, his expression one of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. "Captain," He stared at the sky, at the ocean, at the palm trees. Are we dead? Is this heaven or some other kind of cruel joke? I don't think so, Mac, Eva said, though a part of her wondered the same thing. She could feel the grit of sand on her skin, the warmth of the sun, the ache in her muscles. This was real. Too real to be an illusion, too peaceful to be another torment. A little further down the beach, Rila was stirring, helped by Kenji. Rila's face was pale. The dark lines that had marred her skin were almost invisible now, faded to the faintest of tracings. Kenji, though still looking dazed, had a clarity in his eyes that Eva hadn't seen since before the conceptual thief had begun its insidious work. He was looking at the ocean with a childlike wonder. They were all there, the four of them, survivors. Against all odds, against all logic, they had survived the Odyssey's final, desperate act. The AI's insane gamble had paid off in the most improbable way imaginable. The AI, Rila whispered, her voice filled with awe. It actually worked. It saved us. It saved itself, too, in a way, Max said, a gruff affection in his voice. Went out in a blaze of glory, taking those interdimensional nightmares with it. There was no sign of the Odyssey. No wreckage, no debris. Just the four of them washed up on the shore of this impossible, idyllic world. The dimensional bomb had not just destroyed their pursuers and ripped them free. It had scattered them, as the AI predicted, to an entirely new dimensional stratum, a place seemingly untouched by the horrors they had endured. Over the next few hours, as the initial shock wore off, they explored their immediate surroundings. The island, for it seemed to be an island, was lush, fertile, teeming with unfamiliar but seemingly benign flora and fauna. Freshwater streams trickled down from low, verdant hills. Strange, colorful fruits hung from the trees, smelling sweet and edible. They were castaways, marooned in an alien paradise. They had no technology, no tools beyond what little they had on their persons. Eva still had her empty flare gun. Their knowledge, though ravaged by their experiences, was slowly returning. The oppressive weight of the interdimensional horrors lifted. They were starting from nothing. But they were alive, and they were, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, safe. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that were beautiful rather than menacing, they sat together on the beach, watching the waves. A comfortable silence settled between them, the silence of shared trauma, shared survival, and a dawning, fragile hope. "What now, Captain?" Mac asked, his voice quiet. Eva looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of ocean. The broken compass had led them through unimaginable hells. It had tested them, broken them, remade them. And then, in its final, cataclysmic act, it had delivered them here. "Now, Mac," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Now we survive, we rebuild, we live." She didn't know what this new world held. It could have its own dangers, its own challenges, but they would face them together. They were the last remnants of the Odyssey, bound by their shared ordeal, their shared loss. The silence of this world was different. It wasn't the silence of the void, or the oppressive silence of the labyrinth, or the ringing silence after an explosion. It was a living silence, filled with the gentle sounds of nature, the promise of a new beginning. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, unfamiliar constellations in an unfamiliar galaxy. But for the first time, Eva looked at them not with fear or the desperate need to navigate, but with a sense of quiet wonder. The journey of the broken compass was over, or perhaps it had just begun on a new, uncharted course, guided not by failing technology or alien malevolence, but by the resilient, indomitable spirit of its last four survivors. They were lost, yes, but they were also finally found. And in the quiet peace of this alien shore, that was enough. The end.